So hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm very excited about this conversation, and I'm very excited to speak with my guest. My name is Liz Cook. My website is Core Awareness. I'm a somatic educator and a conceptual artist, and I wanted to create this conversation around biodynamic processes in life, as well as gardening and farming, because it is a philosophical, it's a paradigm shift, and it's a way of creating coherency in my life, in my work, in the way I see the world, really, and participate in the world. So today I invited very Psoas savvy Janice Cathey to have a conversation because she has studied with me and worked with me, but independently, she has created a business with the same kind of principles. So we're going to dialogue about those principles and what they really mean to us and how we might be implementing them and how you might be able to implement some of these ideas into a new paradigm of thinking around business, creating a life of support for yourself and maybe a legacy for your family. So I want to introduce Janice a little bit. Our conversation, the focus of our conversation was, I'm going to actually find what I said it was, because I think that's probably the best way to do this, is I called it talking to someone who's doing biodynamic entrepreneurship and a conversation of body of culture paradigm and woman-centered approach for developing a healthy business model. And so with that as our focus, I want to introduce Janice, and I'm going to introduce her by telling you a little about. So Janice is the CEO of Cathey Integrative Health, and I understand from what you've told me, Janice, as well as knowing you, that you started out as a medical shiatsu practitioner, and you had a very viable business. You said, I had successful booking. Every available slot was in advance year after year with little or no glitches. So obviously you were successful in having a one-to-one relationship with clients and creating a way of sustaining yourself that way. But 5 years ago, you opened Cathey, which was an integrative health collaborative. And you were working with effective, low risk, high impact model. And that it allowed you to grow multiple streams of care without the burden of a singular care model or personal burnout. So it's an integrative model. And the integrative model of health, whether that is my own personal care or the way I work with my students, the way I've built a business that's 45 years old, are based on some principles that you and I share. And so I'm going to name some of those principles before we get into our dialogue. The reason I called it biodynamic is because that's the way I think. And biodynamic principles are based on a holistic, ecological, ethical approach. And it's a very concise model of inclusion of living organisms and actually wilderness, which is a lot about my work with Stalking Wild, is it's taking life at its very essence, knowing that it's incredibly intelligent and collaborating with life itself. But one of the things the system has is a high degree of self-sufficiency. So it's interesting, we're collaborating, we're integrating, we're biodiversifying, we're complexifying, we have interconnectedness, and yet we have self-sufficiency. And that's a perspective that people often don't take. It's kind of one or the other. So I feel like biodynamics speaks exactly to what it is I intuitively am working with. I also come from a 300-year-old farm generation. So land is something that's been passed on through all the dirt that I've eaten, and also my family's dirt, all of it. However you want to think about that. So, so playing with that idea, biodynamics is rooted in the work of a scientist and philosopher, Dr. Rudolf Steiner. And although I didn't study Steiner's principles themselves, I wasn't involved in a Steiner school or even reading any of his work, actually. Anytime I've ever read anything of his that he's written, it just was like, well, of course. It seems so logical to me. But he developed a form of system called anthroposophy. And anthropo means human, and Sophia means wisdom. So it was based on the premise that all beings can develop their inner potential and access a spiritual world, as well as thrive here on earth. So there was no separation between what we think of as spirituality in the sense of spirit. You could also call it field work now, which is what it's called in physics. But this idea that life is alive, that all life is alive. So our job, the way we perceive the world and how we integrate our job into the world is alive. It's not materialistic and it's not mechanistic. So my work has shifted body as a form of work from object to process. And Janice has been taking it to another scale of what is a system, what do you call a form of business into a level of process? How do we incorporate process into business in this very organic, very responsive, intuitive, and the word I think of the day is nimble way of creating a working system? How do we use what we understand nature does naturally within ourselves to create a functional system that's sustainable and is supportive of everyone involved? So not only sustainable for the person creating it, but is really creating something that is community in a deep level of relationship. So thank you, Janice, for joining me on this conversation.
Oh my gosh, Liz, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's so much to say here. So I think the very first place I'll start is to talk about regenerative principles. And so as a body worker and a somatics educator, I came to the work going, okay, how do I interface with body? And first, I had to really learn how I interfaced with myself. As an immigrant and as a brown female growing up in the United States, I arrived here in the early 1970s. It's really, my life has been about learning how to stabilize. And when I learn how to stabilize, I learn how to regulate. And that regulation builds a capacity. And I've applied that rule over and over and over again, not only to my own personal life, but also to the formulation of a private practice, and then the formulation of a company. And the company itself has been such an interesting, and Liz and I have been talking about this for a number of years. You know, I said, Liz, I'm building my company off of somatics. It was like, I don't know what that means exactly, but I know that that's what I'm doing. And when I talk to people who are other CEOs or other business managers, especially bankers, what I've noticed is that the old paradigm has changed. And it's not that it is, not everybody's playing by the same rules. And so I think that the old rule has been like, you take value, you take the monies that the banks give you, right? And you create value. And I think that something has shifted. It's shifted in such a big way for myself as a woman, as myself as an immigrant, but also how I interface with business creation. And although it's not a set of principles and rules, I have other guidance that are created that I can mimic, and those are ecosystems. And I find that when we look at the way in which an ecosystem thrives, it thrives because there's diversity. And I don't, as a CEO, don't want to be the top heavy know-it-all. I don't know it all. It is my team that I lean into in order to find the answers, in order to know how to navigate to move forward.
That's beautiful. We wanted to get into some of the real nitty-gritty because we know some of you are here because you want to create something. And so, you know, we're going to get into kind of the messiness of it, that there isn't this structure that you're following. It is intuitive. It is about your sensory awareness and the feeling quality of what you're creating and whether it feels right. And then some of the kind of ways. So the idea, some of your questions that you and I have talked about is this idea of, like, for example, branding. So let's talk a little bit about how you have kind of wrestled with that idea, because the business model is to build it around yourself. Right. And to make you the brand. And in a way, you might have done that with your, you know, when you're working independently, right? You might create, but my brand, you know, my brand isn't Liz Cook, and my brand isn't the Psoas, even though that's what my expertise is on. My brand was called Core Awareness, partly because my desire was, and that's what the trademark is Core Awareness, is I wanted a perception of what am I doing? I'm actually working with awareness. I'm not working with the Psoas, and you're not working with me. And all of us have awareness, and all of us have core awareness. So I branded it to address what I felt was significant in my work. Tell us about how you're thinking about branding and what you've discovered in that journey.
Oh my, it's, you know, it's been, especially now in the world of social media. I don't have an Instagram account, a personal Instagram account. I don't have, or I turned off my personal Facebook account, only because I didn't get a good feeling. I'm sensitive, and so when I interfaced with those mechanisms, I never left feeling good. My business, however, does. And it's important that my business has a platform, that it does have a voice. And that voice is a collective voice. And so what I found is that I'm only one singular person who has a body of education that I can offer, and that I can hold space. I can hold space. I can hold a container, so I can hold the ecosystem of this of the business. But what I found is, like, if it's just my one voice, or just my one my look, my knowledge, then it limits the perspective of an integrative system. And so it didn't feel right. I felt like I wanted to multi-source in order to strengthen the company, rather than to singularly, you know, uphold the company with my voice, my opinion, my face. It didn't feel right.
Yeah. And your name of it is also, I think, important, because tell people a little bit about what you've created, because as a you know, integrated health is different than integrated medicine, right? Yeah. And Halib has a meaning for you. So tell people a little bit about the name of your business and what it is you're actually creating.
Right. So that's a loaded question. Where do I start? So Hale, so Hale means home in Hawaiian. Not only does Hawaiian I am not of Hawaiian lineage. And so the Hawaiian culture is very rich and very rooted in earth energy. If you think about Hawaii, it's the newest energy all the time because there's volcanoes there. And so this earth is erupting and creating itself. It's actually renewed energy all the time. And I thought a whole lot about that as I was thinking about what is home and what does that mean to me as an immigrant who moved to a land that isn't my own. It's not where my native peoples come from. And really to locate that and to feel that in my bones has always been about my body, about where I am and how I'm feeling within myself. And so naming Hale was very challenging for me because not only does Hale mean home in Hawaiian, but my mom named me Ha, and her last name is Lei, so Hale. And I didn't know that until like, I don't know, 6 years ago. I was chopping vegetables with my mom, as I do on Sundays. And um, she has this way of just like dropping information bombs. And so I don't remember exactly how she dropped it, but she was like, oh, hey, by the way, I named you Ha when you were born, but I thought dad needed out work, and so he didn't know what to name you, but he thought, well, I'll just name her after my sister, Janice. Hence, I am Janice Cathey. In order to immigrate to the United States, I needed, my father and his Americanness to get me here, and I'm very thankful. And I identify with being Janice, but naming my business Hale meant so much to me because I was birthing. I felt like I was really delivering something that was so much bigger than myself.
Yeah. Yes, and your native country is Vietnam.
Vietnam. That's right. I was born in Vietnam. I was there until I was 2.5 years old and came to the United States in the 1970s. Yeah.
So what are the services that you're offering? Tell people a little bit about how you've gathered together a group of people to create a vision. What is the vision of your business?
So we are built on the regenerative practices that build health and really enhance resiliency. That's the base. That's really it. And so if you were to tell me like, okay, so for instance, Yulia is on board with us in this conversation. She practices medical Qigong. So we have, and I really categorize Qigong in somatics. And so we have a platform of somatics that includes Feldenkrais, that includes Qigong, and that includes meditation as well. But we don't just sit and meditate, we move and meditate. So we have 5 different domains of care, and those domains are acupuncture, bodywork, nutrition, counseling, and somatics. In addition to that, we have a medical provider who sort of navigates for people who have more complicated issues and haven't found relief. We really utilize the sort of mapping idea that you're going to really traverse through life, and with that, we provide a map that really guides you towards best health results.
That's wonderful. And you're also interfacing with the health community.
We are.
Yeah, if you want, speak a little bit about that, because, when we think about these alternative healthcare systems, they sit isolated from the larger community. And you are trying to both also grow interfacing into the relationship of that. So you're not just setting aside here, this is something special that's different than, you're also with a medical doctor capable of starting to actually challenge, maybe that's not your intention, but integrate, diversify, include, be inclusive in the work that people are doing of how to actually become well. Because we often go to the medical doctor for both a diagnosis, which I often say to people is a really good idea, right?
Right.
because then you can choose how you want to deal with the diagnosis, but it's a good idea to know what it's defined as. Can't hurt to know. And then you may believe him or not, or you may choose to choose a different way. But so tell us a little bit about the, I think, inclusive piece, because that is part of biodiversity, is everything's included. We don't have these separate systems. We're all one system, and they interface in different ways.
Exactly. The interrelated communication that we have on board. So what we do is, I almost wanted to call what we do like narrative healthcare, because we're really listening to people's stories.
And I think that's a good one, eh? I like it.
That.
Yeah, I think you should TM that right away.
I'm gonna go, purchase the domain
look at that,
right after.
Look at that trademark. ASAP, girl.
That's right. So the way in which we interface with other is by listening, right? And we listen, and by paying attention, we can guide them. And what we've found is that doctors really don't have time to listen, and they're using their scientists, and so what they're doing is they're really prescriptive, and a lot of times people, I think a diagnosis is a really great place to start, because it allows us to kind of dive in and say, well, what are the realities of this diagnosis, and how does it work? And so then we kind of get to sniff around and really kind of dig out and root in, and maybe pull out things that don't need to be there. And with that dialogue that we have with other, we're doing our soap notes, and so we do intensive note taking, and so we're not just saying, okay, what's the diagnosis or what are the symptoms, but rather we're saying, Liz showed up and her granddaughter's birthday was last week, and she is excited that her granddaughter is growing and that she's healthy. That means something to an individual. That means something, that says something about our humanness. And not only is Liz excited about her granddaughter, but she's also really worried about this pandemic. And so it's like we can kind of go into conversation, and not that Liz is, but that we go into conversation.
I can't see my granddaughter. That's why.
That's right. That's exactly right. That we go into conversation about the individual. With that said, it's important that these notes, that we can share them with one another, but that we can point to them to other physicians, and that we can say to other clinicians, like, we've taken it one step further, and we want to collaborate with you as you're working with Liz on her allergies, or her, frozen shoulder, or her whatever it is that they're interfacing with, migraines or whatever it is. And so we can have that conversation with one another, with our client, and then also with other clinicians.
And how does this work into the financial realm? Because business is always about making money. A livelihood, usually, unless it's otherwise we call it something else, like volunteering. And one of the things, the distinguishing features in creating a business, because I created a business, was to define whether it's a hobby or a business, and that is defined in the realm of both paying taxes and all kinds of ways. So how have you played with the health system? You're in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yes.
And the local or the larger health dynamics, how have you looked at, how does that work? How does that support you, support the people who are coming to you? Is it, tell us a little bit about the nitty gritty of how you've shaped that in your thinking. Like, how are you thinking about it? Not so much the specific details, although some of those would be nice, but like, how have you thought about it? How does this interface? Can people afford it? Or am I only offering this to a select group of people? Or am I looking for a large community? How have you parsed that out or sniffed it out?
Yes. So that's something that I've thought a whole lot about, because it's easy to become a boutique provider and have a subset of individuals that you treat. And those individuals are usually in the upper echelon of the economy. And so they're well educated, they travel quite a bit, you know, they live in, you know, with comfortable means. And so they have this extra expenditure that they can do for themselves, which is usually categorized as self-care. And so that was me for a very long time, actually. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's plenty of room there to grow. But as I pivoted towards the integrative model, I really wanted people of all races to have access to this care, because this is really, to me, the most natural way to care for oneself, is through awareness. And that is something that traditionally Indigenous people have provided for one another. And we've come so far away from that. And we can discuss the mechanicalization that, you know, science has really imprinted on culture, and how we really view body as a machine rather than a biointelligent being that has processes that can change. And so how did I pivot? I pivoted by offering systems that are covered by insurance and staying within the realm of those systems. So part of the platform are systems that are provided through the lens of medical care. So nutrition, counseling, and also our medical consults are all covered by insurance. The acupuncture bodywork somatics piece will be covered by insurance. It's going to take them a couple of years to get that done, but it's coming down the pipeline. And so that's exciting. It's an exciting emergent field. And so I just encourage you, if that's where you are, to hold ground and to hold that space, because we're going to see the floodgates open, I think.
Great. So did you contact, how did you find that? Did you just research online? Did you start talking to your local community or your state community? How did you research that, or feel like you really understood what you were able to provide for people?
I am, like you, Liz, a very curious person. So I sniffed it out. I wanted, I'll tell you, like, where the seed that really sprouted for me was like, oh man, my mom can't afford this. Like and I want my mom to be able to receive body work. And my mom is a nail tech and, is in the Vietnamese culture. And although she saves her money and does, and I am a provider for my mother, which has all kinds of complications, but, not only do we cut vegetables.
Is the nice thing. Yeah. My nail tech is my daughter.
And my nails
see my toenails, and I can't. So there's payback there somewhere.
That's right. Yeah. And my mom studied cosmetology for a while, and she was practicing, and she like ripped off my whole eyebrow once, and I was like, oh God, you'll never touch me again, Mom.
Gotcha.
So that said, I think access to care has been an important value to me. And so that's where I started going to conferences, and, I'm not a research scientist. I am very much a kinesthetic. I'm all about spatial awareness. And so to go sit in like a big, huge ballroom of a hotel, and I did this many times, with, people with teaching hospitals. And so I followed Sloan Kettering and UCLA and Harvard and Yale, and I would go and I would sit and just listen. And what I was hearing is that there was this emergent field coming forward based on research, and that there was evidence, and not that I needed to be convinced, but that the scientists were starting to see that there is something afoot here. There's something changing here, and they were applying their scientist minds to measuring the effect of body work and acupuncture and somatics and meditation. And so I was sort of in the beginning of all of that. Is back when NIH, the National Institute of Health, actually had an arm called CAM, which was complementary alternative medicine. And I'll be honest with you, like, I don't believe in the alternative. I believe in complementary.
Yeah, I do too. Well, just to say, I did something similar. At one point, I wanted to know, so my question was different, but my question was, I wanted to know how to bring information to the masses. So similar, but different. And I can't remember how I found out about it, but I found out about a conference in New York City that is a coaching conference in which they take you and they teach you how to do an elevator conversation, like basically in 30 seconds or less, define what it is that you do and be able to sell it to someone else. They had us come, and not only did they do the, getting us to really, what is it? I mean, in a way, a narrative, right? What is it you do? Why is it important to you? So they're asking you those important questions that maybe nobody has really asked you, didn't put you on the spot, that you had to keep coming up and keep getting clearer, cleaner, so you could do this for yourself. But I paid, thousands of dollars to do it. And then what it culminated in was this amazing group of people who come there all the time, who are magazine editors. I mean, Oprah's staff was there. There were people from TV programs, from everything, because this had become so well done that they wanted the cutting edge people who hadn't quite come out with the newest thing. They wanted to meet them. They wanted to see what was going on. And, to walk, and then you had to walk up to these people and give your pitch and give your 30-second pitch and watch their response. And they were there to look at you and go, I don't think you did a good enough job. go back and try it again, or, oh, tell me more, or, connect with me in some way. And so I did a similar thing where I interfaced with people that I had no relationship with, which was the broader publications, to be able to speak what I do and why I do it and what's the purpose of it. So you can imagine with Psoas going up to people who, one, don't know anything about it, two, the biggest question they said is, why haven't we heard about it? Like, why are you the only person who's talking about this? So that taught me a lot about what is it that how could I find language for what you're doing? And you're very articulate, Janice, in explaining what you do. And I think that's an important piece of creating a business, is the clearer I can be of what is it that I'm doing, then the clearer I can present it to a larger conversation within a community, or within, for me, the publishing world. Like, how could I write an article that was relevant to a particular group of people, but not to another group of people? How could I shape what I understand to different audiences? I mean, every human being has a Psoas. I have a huge audience. I'm not a particular, car manufacturer who's only certain people are going to want my car. Everybody has a Psoas. I mean, I have a lot of potential there. Everybody wants help. You have a lot of potential there. So we're working with, but then how do we not stand apart, but how do we clarify? How do we become coherent, right? So I did it that way, and it sounds like you took some of this. So then what did you do with all that material to make it coherent into how how did you sift or be porous enough to take that into you and not just go, oh my God, this is huge. Well, how did it wake up something for you that way?
I think this goes back to your earlier question of so when a business isn't created on a personality such as my own, and I'm not putting my brand as myself. And so it makes me think of confluence, right? And so when you think of confluence, you know, this is literally the emergence of two things coming together, like two rivers coming together. It's not that. It's not a merger where it's like, oh, we're all coming together and now we're all one and everybody's, living in this utopia. Absolutely not. I'm in constant conversation with each domain of my practice and understanding from them how they're interfacing with the individual that they saw, and also how they're feeling about company, where the company goes. There isn't like, everyone's not a director. I'm the director. And I have to stay my ground there. And it's not that I'm, forcefully directing, but then I'm listening and I'm interfacing with them, for one another. Because what we're doing is we're co-creating a set of ideas that we've all agreed upon, a set of values that we've all agreed upon, and they wouldn't be on board otherwise. And I've had people leave, people leave for various reasons, and sometimes it's because their principles don't align with mine, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. So you've actually been able to take all this and kind of maintain an integral piece to it, which is that this is my vision. And so different than we were talking about, different than a cooperative. You're cooperative, but you're not creating a cooperative. So you're holding on to the position of a CEO that has to kind of orchestrate or what
it has to be coherent.
You have to keep the coherent, kind of like the intelligence of the organism, right? Like we have all these cells doing all these different pieces but what creates the coherence in us is a kind of, it's like the Psoas does a lot of that, in terms of it informs us when something's not right. So you're kind of having you could say your heart on the pulse of this organization, seeing, is it coherent? Is it really being the creature, or is there some flailing going on, or is there, so if we're speaking somatically, is there a kind of flailing going on that I need to hold space for, to ground it and see how it can root into this or not? Tell me more about that, because I think people, so much of this is intellectual, but when we're working in the way we are, we're actually working very sensory based. We're picking up cues that are not intellectual. And so tell me some of the ways that you do that for yourself. How do you, like when you hear this different stuff, we're all can be overwhelmed by other people's responses or, disagreements and I know for a lot of people, it's easy to say, I think I'm going to abandon this, right? So you have a coherency, you have a vision. Tell us how you personally work with that, some of the steps or some of the ways you enter into a conversation with yourself around this.
Right, yeah. I think that for me, I wrote out a list of values, and what I do is, and I'll share those values with you. So, and one of them came out of the last workshop I did with Liz in person. I've done several online with her. But it was, if I'm not in my body, I don't know who I am. And the second to that, as an immigrant, I've learned and I've healed. And the third to that is I am a coherent being and I want to share that. And so when I'm interfacing, so it's not it's not a convergence, right? It's more of a I have agency, and I keep my agency in my company by checking in with my values. And so if I'm needing to tell somebody that I don't want them on the team any longer, I'm not doing it from my feelings, I'm doing it from my values. And if I'm having to make a business decision, which I do every day, and sometimes very difficult business decisions that are complicated, I go to my values. And so I just kind of rest in that I've created this, and I can recreate my values. I can reassess them anytime. It's not like a rigid system. And so I think that it has its own it's its own organism that I interface with, that I created, that I can recreate, and it also evolves.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, give us an example of how it's evolved.
Well, Holly, when we opened 5 years ago, so I was in private practice and I brought on apprentices, and I had 3 different apprentices under me, and it was that top heavy sort of model. And I created Holly out of a desire to really co-create and to also grow the container in which we provided care. So grow resiliency for individuals. I didn't want it just to come from me. And that came out of relationships. So it came out of like many relationships that I had with other healers, other domains, and I invited them on board. And at first it was like, oh, well, we had intuitive yoga, we had Rima, which is a beautiful practice of self-awareness, and we had acupuncture. So it wasn't distilled. It was just sort of like a rodeo. It was like, oh, okay, you ride a horse, come on. Oh, okay, you also ride a horse, come on. We just kind of, I have an arena, let's all go gallop around the arena. And a lot of people, because in the beginning it was a slow grow, and it's still a grow, and it'll always be a grow, but that in the beginning a lot of people suggested that I just have people pay rent to the company. And I thought, no, there's no coherency there, because then you just have individuals who are practicing together under the same roof, but there's no coherency. I'm not actually having to communicate with my neighbor who has the door shut, and then when they open their door, packing up their bags and they're leaving and I'm coming or going. There's no reason for us to have a conversation other than we share a roof, or other than they're my friend and I know them, I'm gonna have tea with them. I want to have conversation with people about care, about best care, about ideas, about how to create health and resiliency for other. And I want to do that with meaning.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to share some of your values? Do you want to kind of say what some of them are?
Sure, absolutely. So for me, I talked about, if I don't have a body, I don't know where I am. And so I think for me, embodiment is really the most core to my own value of a human being. It's like, who am I if I don't have this body? And I see myself as a spirit being who has this, this container that I'm in, and I want to take care of this container. And so within that, there's this illusion that we're all operating under called race. And so it's like I don't like labels, and so I don't really identify myself as brown female, doing some work over here, and or CEO over here, or Vietnamese American over here. I think those are important to guide us and direct us, but I think that labels actually limit us. So that's also one of my values, that I'm progressing and I'm growing, and that I will always be progressing and growing.
Right. I'm going to open it up in a little bit for questions, but so let's talk about anything else that maybe hasn't been said that we'd like to bring in here. Do you have a, you know, what you're doing in a way is a new frontier, right? You know, it's a new, and like you're saying, it's actually, you've got your pulse on how the rest of the world or community or health, and especially the larger health field, is studying that. And I think that's really great, because it's not about being under the radar or kind of poo-pooing, you know, turning away from it, but you're actually, as I did when I did in a different way, wanting to know how the world would understand this. You know, that was really what I wanted to come away with, was what is their reaction to what I'm doing? How would I even begin to make it relevant to them? So you are doing it a different way, but you're reading that pulse. And I think that's really needs to be said again, because I think it's unique. But it's also the piece that's so important to biodynamics, which is that nothing is excluded. So everything is included. And so when you're doing a biodynamic farming, for example, one of the resources I wrote down that I wanted to share with people was, I can't find it right this moment. It's The Biggest Little Farm, whatever. Yeah, Biggest Little Farm.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
a film, and if you haven't watched it, watch it, because it'll teach you about biodynamics. And so, you know, the idea is that people come in to try to restore or to create health or to create a new dynamic, but then something comes in and kind of ruins it, right? And you know, whether that's the owls or the coyotes or, you know, eating the chickens, or, you know, and so the first response is wanting to kind of push away that which is, how do you get rid of what you don't like, right? What's irritating or what's ruining your plan. So if you take it as a metaphor, what's ruining your plan? And instead, they studied the livelihood of these animals and the way that they needed to be included into, and what did they actually have to offer that enhanced the experience. And so they actually, you know, made owls, you know, so that the owls homes, and encouraged them to come so that they would eat the rodents or the, you know, so like you start to find this relationship of what happens and why coyotes show up, because what has happened to them. And so I love this idea of kind of weaving an interconnection with all life that is no longer this idea, you know, I understand why we created, you know, poisons and the frustration that can be around growing a garden when something comes and eats it, right? But we know ultimately we eat those poisons, and now here we are in this very precarious life. So if we're going to work with this dynamic, what do you do with that which is really seems destructive or seems a problem or seems something that you just would like to get rid of? What has been your strategy for integrating and inclusion and coming into reparative or also restorative processes?
So I see that Yulia has her hand up.
Okay, so answer that question first, and then I'll open it.
Oh, sure. Wow. Okay.
Speak
so
to it. How do you deal with that? And then.
Wow, that's. I don't know that I'm answering the question completely here, so I'm just going to just add my voice to what I think is being asked. There's regenerative principles that build health and that enhance resilience. Not only are those principles, right, built there, and they've been there for indigenous cultures throughout time, And I think that it's our job to, as women, to tap into those resources and to be curious enough to ask questions and to study and to really to find something that resonates with us, and then to kind of stay with that. And so that's really for me like creating the container, and holding the container, not only for myself, but then I get to invite others to come into that container to play with me. And if it doesn't feel right, I can ask them to exit the container. And so, and I get to grow that field, that containment can grow. And so you can think of a farm, and how, you know, you can add acreage and you're going to add more diverse animals and or, you know, plants that will really regenerate the land and help one another grow. And I think that's really what I'm very interested in doing in healthcare, and I'm most interested in doing it for people and to empower individuals.
Yeah. So what I'd like people to do who are online with us is to write your questions, because this is, we are going to make a YouTube video of this, and it would be better if you wrote your questions and then I'll read them to Janice or whoever you're presenting it to. So if you can take a moment and write your questions, then we'll address.
Can I answer your question?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm always curious how, you know, in a business, the business model in America is competitive. It is to destroy something else and to become bigger and better than something else. And here we are working with a biodynamic strategy or a paradigm in which there isn't a hierarchy of that something is more important than another. So even if you are in the CEO position or holding a container, you know, the boundaries, so to speak, of something that's happening, you're going to interface also with the outer world, and its impact on you. And so that has to be somewhat fluid. So in the idea of a biodynamic farm, we're looking for wilderness. We're actually looking to not be isolated from wilderness, and wilderness can be seen as a larger support. It can be seen as a more coherent field. It can also be seen as where scary things are or things that are unknown. So the unknown can show up in your, you know, you can have in anyone creating a business, right? You know, and so I think that was part of what I was getting at is, are there, you know, have you learned from those unknowns? And so rather than, you know, wishing they would just go away, how did they kind of then inform you and actually maybe strengthen
Okay.
your capacity and also the capacity of your organization?
Yes. That's a big question, and the way in which I'll answer it right now is it has to do with resiliency. And so I am one singular person holding with 100% of the responsibility for my company. And there's only so much that this individual can hold, right? And so I will continue to grow my business as long as I can contain it, as long as I can hold it. And I've come up against, well, a pandemic, which is incredibly challenging. And so within the capacity that I have, I turned to actually my the Women's Business Center that I'm associated with turned to me and said, hey, we have a loan for you, and it's at a very low percentage, and it's, you know, X amount of dollars. And I was like, yes, please. And I think where I was going in the very beginning of this conversation is that the old rule is that you create value with the monies that you have. But I think that the new rule is that you create value with the monies that the banks print and lend you, and you make that work. You make the dollars, whether it be banks lending you money or money that you have that you have saved. I've used both my savings. I've also had relationships with bankers. And so that relationship, and it's all built on relationship, that relationship allows me to build not only capacity, but also helps me build value. And when I show that there's value, then the bankers are more interested in talking to me about what's next. It's like owning a house, right? And so it's taking responsibility. It's like, I'm committed to this. I've essentially, I don't want to use marriage because I think that that's not the right term. I am absolutely committed to making the container of health resiliency work, not only for myself, but for other. And if I stay with that, I can take it to, I don't know if we're going to be around in 5 years. I hope that we are. And I have a vision for that, but I don't know that that's necessarily true. And so can I stay with my own value and ride the wave, not knowing exactly where the wave is taking me?
And that's where the resiliency comes in. And you know, one of the ways I did it early on, because I knew nothing about business. Okay, so in a way, if you want to create something and you don't know anything about business, you have to like take business classes or something. I mean, like, you know, and then that's like a second job, right? You have to, you know, so then it's exhausting. So the idea of being able to be a coherent person is to not exhaust yourself, right? And many people in the old strategy is that they just exhaust themselves to create this thing, which may or may not eventually work. And that's not really sustainable for them in many ways. So then they end up selling it, or maybe that's the goal. And then whatever they've created has been sold, but then it's no longer has the values and the essence of what they created. So they might have money in their pocket from selling it, but are they really happy about that? So if we're looking for something more sustainable, one of the things I did that was just keyed off by what you said, the women's group did, was I can't remember the name at the moment, but in the community I lived in, there was a group of people who helped small businesses. So it was like a small business organization. But one of the things they offered, they really liked working with women. You know, they wanted to help women's businesses get off the ground. And I went there and they did basic things for me. They taught me basically how to think about running my business. So they like mentored me some, and they actually years ago actually did my taxes for a period. I was actually under an umbrella. So I was under an umbrella organization that helped support me create what I wanted to create. And that was phenomenal support, because I didn't have to hold it all myself. The container was about what I was creating, but it wasn't, it was within a larger, and I would even not call it container, but it's an organism within another organism within another organism. And that created that wealth of support that allowed it the capacity, like, to really, for me to put my energy where it was really needed. So that's a place to also look as what is happening in the community, because there's some wonderful, wonderful collaborations and groups that you can belong to and get support, both financially, but also just with other tools, with things that I don't know, or to be able to talk to people who have done it before and know things that they can share with you, which is partly what we're shooting for here. Yeah. So I don't see any questions. I don't know if everybody heard my, oh, here we come. So the question is, how do you interact with access, be in relationship with your body directly to guide your decisions, approach, what you're developing? So how does somatically do you do that, Janet?
Um, so I find that I stay in practice. So my practice is my life, and my life is my practice. I will never stop practicing, and I love being able to follow Liz, and I find that she's always on the horizon, so I get to kind of peer in and feel what it is that she's offering, and where she's directing. Um, I have found other teachers that have guided and directed me. I find that I don't try to put too many on my plate all at once, and so that I can really get the fullness of a singular or an entity that's offering a body of work. And so for me, I've played with improv, contact improv.
Yes, let's talk about that, because that's a really important play, because we were talking about it and I didn't know that you had done contact, and I said, oh, that's what you're talking about. It's like, you know, contact improv. How do you lean in but then not give up your own weight, so that if something falls or apart or doesn't support you in the way that you thought wasn't really there for you, you've leaned in, you've connected, but you don't give yourself over to that. So
Right.
that, yeah.
Yeah. So it really illuminated for me. In college I studied, theater and dance, and I was one of those people who really wanted to dance, but my parents I didn't put me in dance classes growing up, and so when I went to college, I was like, that's what I want to do, and I went and I studied both ballet and modern dance, and my plie was like a drop squat, and it just sort of it ignited the kinesthetic body within me to really discover, like, where am I in space and time? And so I just sort of followed my curiosity, which led me into contact improv and many other forms of dance, and that container that contact improv provides, Nancy Stark Smith, who created it, it's really about sort of like leaning in and being guided by your intuition. And so as you lean in, you're being held by another being, another force. And so I really like that principle of like, we're illuminated beings that are leaning into one another, and yet I'm not that other person and they're not me, and I'm feeling to see where it is that I like where it is the limit is, right? And then I'm going to come away from it, and I think that really was a fascinating body of work to start developing.
Yeah. And I think landing and locating, the getting on the ground, the really tuning in to your own biointelligence. I find that the creative juices that's where they are. So it's not in, I don't actually use meditative processes. I know how to get quiet. I, spend time at the Zen Center in San Francisco. As I'm more, I want to actually let life move me. I want to be moved. So when I get on the floor and I tune into my sensory system, what's going on for me in this moment, and I feel a gesture or a movement, I allow myself to just respond, to follow my impulse. And the following of my own impulses in that make me less impulsive when it comes to making a decision. Because I'm calmer from a real nourished place inside, I'm able to sit with something and not be reactive to it immediately. And that's been a journey for me, because I am pretty much want to just say what I want to say right at the moment I want to say it. And I'll put a fuck you in there with it. That is just how I perform.
How you roll.
But there are moments where allowing myself to be more porous, to allow something to drop in a little deeper, to allow it to really sit with me. Maybe because it's not the familiar, maybe it's very unknown, and I don't quite know what to do with it. I find that kind of incredible landing so powerful. And then one of my probably most creative spaces of time and space is when I first wake up in the morning. What is coming through in that moment often shapes my entire day. And I totally trust my intelligence, my intuitive intelligence. And I'm actually often amazed by what shows up, because I don't think I would have thought of it. It's kind of, I'm being really moved about something that feels really, so a lot of my creative ideas come out of that very juicy moment. So not picking up a phone, not reading my emails, not doing things like that first thing. So if I'm going to, if I have this impulse to create, I don't let any of that other stuff, I don't leave it to later. My creative comes first, and then everything else comes later. And even with children in the home, that was workable, because, well, I unschooled, so my children didn't have to get up and go someplace, and they felt that way. They were often the most involved with their own lives and their own explorations. So it has always worked for me to really pay attention to those impulses in the morning of how the day begins, that first fresh, oh yeah, what if I took this and ran with it, and then playing with that is how I've done it. I wanted to read something you wrote, because I think it's a kind of nice way to end. And then if you want to speak to it. You wrote, we know women who lead create better lives for themselves and for their communities. This is, for centuries, women have been the low-hanging fruit who provide food, shelter, and medical care for their loved ones. As an immigrant and a woman, my worth has been measured by my capacity to care for others. As a leader, I've yet to define my role. Do I take this pivotal point and tell my company's story, which is so embedded into my own personal story? And that's a question you were holding. This is not totally clear or not clear for me. I don't want to fall into the trap of repeating the control, measure, dominant, extract, and overwrought masculinity, that strong leader model. And I'm willing to be challenged for the long-range goals and the future growth. Yeah, that's very beautifully said.
Thank you.
Because we have associations to what it means to grow a business, or to be in business, or to be recognized as successful or as accomplished. And I know for myself that what feels accomplishment may or may not be on the outside of my life.
Right.
Yeah. So I am not the top echelon of somatic educators. Like people like Mark Walsh, who's putting together as many human somatic educators as possible, has let me know that. I'm on the next tier. I said, oh, great, thanks. Thanks for telling me where I am on the somatic tier. I am not the top level. And part of me is like, oh, okay, I can handle that. I can live with that. Because when it lands in me, what I really want to know is, how do I feel about my life? How nourishing is my life? How much freedom has my work created for me in the ways that I can travel? I can't travel right now. See my kids, spend time doing the things I love. Like, what is the value of your business if it isn't to support you? To really create a lush life. And one of the last things we talked about was legacy as well, is that we create something that's actually, it could be a model of a way of doing business that really works. It could be that you had for a while the idea that maybe this could be a pilot project that could then be brought into other communities, because you've learned to kind of share that with other women and other providers. So speak,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
speak to some of that.
Um, Thank you for reading that. I do feel that there's so much more that we could traverse into, and I hope that we'll continue to have these conversations, Liz. The way in which emergent fields is really the words that keep coming up for me, and I feel like that's where we are, is we're on the precipice of an emergent field. And that doesn't mean just in healthcare, but that means really in society.
Yes.
I really think that, and as women, I think we each have a responsibility to carry forth these ideas for ourselves. And I think I'm, like you, Liz, not interested in being in the upper echelon of healthcare. Leave that to the other people who want to fight and gnarl at one another in order to keep that stance. I have one of my best friends is in corporate America in banking, and I just see how stressed she is all the time, and trying to stay competitive, trying to stay not only competitive, but they are always trying to find out how to sell more, and I'm not interested in selling for the sake of selling. I'm interested in nourishing for the sake of nourishing, and there is a cost with that, of course. And at the end of the day, is it sustainable for me, and is it sustainable for others that I'm working with? And there's a point in which I'm always having to check in, and the way in which I've formulated Hale is that we're a limited liability company with the idea that we are wanting to grow, and we are wanting to scale. I want to take the business and scale it. But in order to do that, I am formulating the process. And that's taking time and a lot of agency. But also it's a lab, it's a testing lab. And so we're not there yet, but we're ever closer than we were 5 years ago. And for me, that's the work. That's the enjoyment. It's like, oh, it's challenging, it's interesting, and it keeps me engaged.
Yeah. 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 So the growth is a big piece to business. It's like if your business isn't growing, then you're not successful. And that's the old model. And in the new model, as Jill brings in, feels like emergent fields are also a return to our origins in many ways. And I think that's that indigenous way of life where sustainability and a sense of realness and a care is really what you're sustaining. And for me, I feel that there's that success in creating a sustainable life. I can take care of myself, but I do make choices in that of how I give my time and how what I give away and what I don't give away. And that's a balance. That's right. That's that sustainability within your own system. I mean, I think during this time of COVID-19, we've seen a lot of people kind of share a lot online for free. And I know some of that is that they want to do that. But when that was happening, I thought, well, there's already all those people doing that, so everybody's good. You can tune in. And I know the strategy behind that as a business is to say, if I give you something for free, you'll know what I do, and maybe you'll come back and purchase something. It's like standing out and handing the coupon, and that's a strategy in business that's used. And I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I mean, I'm going to do things like we're doing because it's fun.
Mm-hmm.
This is free, so it's fun. I'm good with it. But I'm also going to, as an elder, use my time wisely and my finances wisely. And so I'm not going to go from having my out workshops to free workshops. I'm going to scale them to Zoom. So I'm using a strategy of how do I offer something for people who have lost their income, who have wanted to study with me, who haven't had a chance to travel or come to a workshop? And how do I pay my bills? And how do those two things work? So I think that when we're looking at this idea of all or nothing, or trying to grow so that we get bigger, so somehow that will sustain us, in small business, it doesn't actually work. And I don't even think it works in large business anymore. Yeah. So the growth model is no longer the model we want to work with. It's really about how does it recycle? How do we do a regenerative process in which what you spend your time doing nourishes you, whether through the spirit and creativity, or whether through the paying your gas bill, or, like, how do we recycle our energy? So there's not a giving away, there's not a release that just goes out into the whatever, but it's always about how does it feed back into me. And people often say, oh, that's selfish. And I go, no, it's not. That's sustainability. This is how sustainability happens, is self-care. Yeah. And certainly that's a model for you for selling, right? Yeah. Yeah, because you look really healthy and good, so people can say, oh, well, maybe
I want that. I want to, yeah. That's me.
Yeah.
We can have a conversation about that.
So, well, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
And thank you, everybody, for being here as our support. And I hope you've enjoyed this time all together. So I'm going to turn the recording off. And, yeah.